Welcome to another captivating movie recap. Lucas Boyd is a detective in Mississippi who lost his daughter in a drowning accident not long ago. He's currently on his way with his partner, Detective Kirsch, to arrest a man who has been reported for defilement. When they barge into his apartment, they find a slender girl. She finds it hard going to Detective Boyd, so he tells her he isn't going to hurt her, and for that reason, she gives in. Detective Boyd hands the girl over to Detective Kirsch and proceeds to arrest the man. He refuses the arrest and is trying to reach out for his gun. However, Detective Boyd sees him fast enough and shoots him dead. Following that, the scene shifts to Rome, where Inspector Mario and his team are pursuing a ritual killer named Randiku. Randiku, being swift and experienced, evades all the police's efforts and makes a quick escape. Inspector Mario doesn't give up. He continues to run after him until he catches up with him and starts a fight. Randiku beats him so badly and is about to kill him when another inspector appears from behind, tragically becoming the one who doesn't survive. Randiku sees the others arriving and leaves the scene. Days later, Randiku meets Mr. Farner, a businessman who plainly states that he needs his services. He says he wants more power and insight to do business, so Randiku gives him his card, asking him to call him when he's ready. Back in Mississippi, Detective Boyd is all alone at home when he begins to recollect how hard he tried to save his daughter when he found her, but to no avail. Mr. Farner and Randiku arrive in Mississippi. After some days, Mr. Farner calls Randiku to execute their mission as planned. Randiku sets off to a park and spots a girl who he intends to kidnap. Sometime later, Detective Boyd and his partner discover the body of the girl Randiku set his eyes on. Her eyes had been plucked out, her left hand was off and genitals were cut off and then dumped into the water. The body is then taken for an autopsy. The doctor verifies that someone took the life of the victim before discarding her. Observing the depth of the cuts and the rope marks on her legs, it becomes evident that she was somehow subjected to hanging. Detective Boyd informs the captain about his interest in the case, but he tells him to forget about it and pursue cases with better leads. Detective Boyd doesn't agree with him and goes on to pursue the case. Days later at a basketball court, we see Randiku's van parked in the distance. One of the players asks his little brother to go home because it's getting late and their mom will be worried. He isn't happy about leaving, but his big brother has spoken, and he heads home. Just about 2 minutes walk away from the court, Randiku drives his van to the little boy's direction and takes him away. Later at night, Randiku takes the little boy to an abandoned building in the woods. He ties the boy and begins to recite some incantations with candles and other objects around him. After the incantations, he takes the boy away to execute him. The next day, the police discover a middle-aged man dead by the riverside in the woods. According to his wife, he normally goes out fishing but never goes beyond 10 a.m. He was reported missing, and later, some kids found him dead. In that same area, Detective Kirsch takes Detective Boyd to the abandoned building where the little boy was killed. They find dried bones, oranges, candles, and the incantations written in blood on the wall. Detective Boyd asks for the pictures of the words to be taken and then leaves. The doctor tells Detective Boyd how expertise the killer is because he sliced out the man clean, and with the little boy, his parts were cut too, just like the girl they found. The doctor shows him some items they brought from his altar for examination. Finely powdered gold, including a selection of herbs, among them rooibos originating from Africa. Detective Boyd takes that for further investigation. He goes to Mr. Mackles, a professor of African studies, to help him out. Mr. Mackles hails from Lesotho in South Africa, and his knowledge isn't primarily derived from books, rather, he has personally witnessed or experienced most of what he knows. The fragrance of the herb overwhelms him when he smells it. He immediately asks Detective Boyd where it's coming from but refuses to say anything when he questions him back on what the herb is. Mr. Mackles says it's just normal herbs, bark of trees and other fermented tree roots. Detective Boyd then tells him he found it on a crime scene and shows him the writings on the wall so that he will interpret them. Mr. Mackles expresses his displeasure in the case and apologizes, and then he leaves. In Rome, Inspector Mario still hasn't given up searching for Randiku. He goes to a corner where Africans sell goods and approaches one man to help him locate Randiku. He shows him a picture of Randiku and tells him about the bodies and altars that were found while tracking him down. The trader tells him Randiku is a Sangoma, touched by God, a witch doctor. He works for rich and powerful clients. He then advises the inspector to be careful because he could be his next target. Inspector Mario thanks him and offers him some money, but he rejects it. Following that, Detective Boyd is leaving the school but isn't quite convinced that Mr. Mackles told him everything he needs to know, so he goes back to him. He pleads with Mr. Mackles on behalf of the dead kids to interpret the writings for him. Detective Boyd then takes him to the building where the little boy was killed. He says the writings are in Swahili and it means, "Here I take the power, here I become the power." He again tells him Randaku is a Sangoma, a medicine man, exactly as Inspector Mario was also told. Muti, as they call it, medicine, but Randaku is utilizing the dark side of it. Mr. Mackles explains to Inspector Boyd that it is somehow similar to the way pharmaceutical companies use stem cells from aborted fetuses to create vaccines, but in this case it is a ritual performed to provide power to the individual. Most people who pay for this muti are businessmen, salesmen, politicians, and others who seek power, success, protection, and insight. They continue to talk in a restaurant where Mr. Mackles tells him about some distinct effects of the body parts in muti. The genitals bring good luck, eyes bring farsightedness and vision, the brain knowledge and political power. He again tells him that those two bodies were just him preparing himself. Detective Boyd then tells his partner about it. Mr. Farner makes another request. This time around, he wants a girl, specifically one with beautiful eyes, intelligent and filled with promise. Randaku then heads to a bar and begins a conversation with the bar attendant. He finds her beautiful, so he wants to know about her intelligence and other things. He compliments her eyes and asks her about herself. She's pre-med at the university but is on break and wants to make some money. Sounds intelligent to him, and that's exactly what Mr. Farner wants. At that same time, two officers are driving around and stopped by a van that was reported stolen some weeks ago. They head into the bar for further questioning. Randaku immediately pulls out his knife, slashes their throats, and leaves without the girl. In no time, the other officers hear about it and rush to the place. Randaku watches them from a nearby building. The bar attendant describes Randaku to Detective Boyd. They fetch his fingerprints, and while heading out, a woman says she's been seeing a black tall man going in and out of that building for some days now. Detective Boyd perceives it's Randaku and rushes there with his team to find him. Detective Boyd comes across the room where Randaku has gathered all his materials for another ritual. Just then, he hears him escaping through the fire staircase into the third floor and tells the others about it. When an officer tries taking him down, he brings out his knife and kills him on the spot. Detective Boyd comes into contact with him, but he pushes him and continues his run. Randaku escapes through a window. Detective Boyd tries shooting him down, but he swerves the bullets and is nowhere to be found again. Detective Boyd goes back into the building and finds his partner bleeding and immediately rushes her to the hospital. The next day, Detective Boyd brings Mr. Mackles to the building, but he finds nothing new. Later at the station, they match Randaku's fingerprints, which come out indicating that he is a dead man for 6 years now. One can only do that if he has higher connections. An officer hands Detective Boyd a card they found in Randaku's apartment, and quickly, he calls to fetch more info. Inspector Mario briefs him about Randaku's killings all throughout Europe and mentions that he is working for Mr. Farner. After the call, Detective Boyd goes to Mr. Farner's house and threatens to kill him and eat his liver if he ever touches another kid. Randaku also visits Mr. Mackles and threatens him, asking him not to help Detective Boyd any further. Mr. Mackles tells Detective Boyd about it and asks him to come pick him up. Randaku spots another girl in the school and takes her to meet Mr. Farner. Mr. Farner likes her because she's beautiful, athletic, and intelligent. He promises to give her a scholarship and asks Randaku to get her ready for her surprise. Soon the girl is reported missing. Detective Boyd knows it's the doing of Randaku, so they head out to find him. Mr. Mackles suggests they go to any warehouse owned by Mr. Farner, which is near a water body. Detective Boyd and Mr. Mackles then head to the address. When they arrive, Detective Boyd goes in alone to find Randaku. He intrudes on Randaku's ritual and asks him to drop his knife. Just then, Mr. Farner appears behind him and strikes him down. Mr. Mackles also shows up and slashes Mr. Farner's throat. Randaku angrily walks towards Mr. Mackles and grips his throat, strangling him to death. Right then, Mr. Mackles stabs him twice and he falls to the ground and later runs away when he hears the police sirens wailing. Mr. Mackles also leaves before their arrival. After a while, Inspector Mario calls Detective Boyd and informs him that 9 months ago, Randaku was attending a lecture in Rome with a professor named Mackles. Detective Boyd goes to visit his partner at the hospital, and the doctor reveals to him that someone came to visit Detective Kirsch last night, a friend. Her description matches Mr. Mackle's. She says he prayed over her and said she'll be fine. Later, Detective Boyd tries reaching Mr. Mackle's, but there's no answer. Sometime later, Detective Boyd pays a visit to his daughter's grave, leaving behind a bouquet of flowers. He arrives at his house days later and finds a package in front of his door. He opens it up, and there's a note from Mr. Mackle's saying he got him, referring to Randiku. The little package contains Randiku's eyes. Detective Boyd doesn't waste time to think. He puts the whole thing into his mouth and eats it. He probably wants the vision and farsightedness, as explained earlier by Mr. Mackle's. The end. Check out these other recaps on your screen.